Martin contacted me to advise that he had decided to resign his office as Royal Commissioner into the Northern Territory Juvenile Detention and Protection Systems. He explained to me the reasons for his decision, which, as you know, he has outlined in the statement he made a short while ago. As Mr. Martin said, notwithstanding criticisms made of him by certain individuals, his resignation does not imply that a Royal Commission conducted by him would have been tainted by either real or apprehended bias. Nevertheless, the government understands and accepts Mr. Martin's decision. We are also mindful of and respectful of his desire to protect the privacy of his family, in particular his daughter. We thank Mr. Martin for his willingness to serve. The important thing now is not to allow this event to delay or in any way hinder the important work of the Royal Commission, and it will not. The Prime Minister, the Minister for Indigenous Affairs and I spoke many times over the weekend about the best way now to progress the work of the Commission. We've also heard and heeded the many Indigenous voices who have asked for the representation of an Indigenous person on the Royal Commission. I'm announcing today that the Government will recommend to His Excellency the Administrator of the Commonwealth, the Honourable Paul de Jersey, the appointment of 2 Royal Commissioners to replace Mr. Martin. The Honourable Margaret White AO, a former Justice of the Supreme Court of Queensland, and Mr. Mick Gooda, who is currently the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Social Justice Commissioner at the Human Rights Commission. Justice White served for more than 2 decades on the Supreme Court of Queensland, including as a member of the Court of Appeal. She has extensive experience in both the civil and criminal jurisdictions and is well known and highly regarded among the judiciary and the legal profession throughout Australia. In 2013, she was made an Officer of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to the judiciary and the law through leadership in administration and contributions to education and law reform. She has significant experience in the conduct of inquiries, having recently presided over a major inquiry into the Queensland racing industry. She is eminently well qualified to conduct this Royal Commission. The other Royal Commissioner will be Mr. Mick Gooda. Mr. Gooda, who is a Gungaloo man from central Queensland, is well known as one of Australia's most highly regarded Indigenous leaders. He has the respect of both sides of politics, as is evident from the fact that he was appointed as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Social Justice Commissioner by a Labor government and reappointed by the coalition government. He has, among many other roles, also served as the Acting Chief Executive of the former Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC, CEO of the Cooperative Research Centre for Aboriginal Health, and as a Senior Consultant to the Aboriginal Legal Service of Western Australia. I should say that when the Prime Minister and I discussed the appointment of an Indigenous person as an additional Royal Commissioner, we asked Senator Scullion to consult with a range of Indigenous groups to seek their advice as to a suitable person, which he did. Mr. Gooda's name was prominent among those recommended. In fact, his was the only name recommended to the government by the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, NATSILS, who wrote that the appointment of Mr. Gooda would demonstrate the government's commitment to building a respectful relationship with Indigenous people. Indeed, given his current position at the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Gooda is an obvious candidate for this role. I've spoken to the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Adam Giles, who strongly supports the course of action that I have outlined and strongly supports these 2 appointments. There will be a meeting of the Federal Executive Council here in Brisbane at 3:30 p.m. today at which the government will advise His Excellency the Administrator to revoke the letters patent issued to Mr Martin and to issue new letters patent in identical terms to Justice White and Mr Gooda. Let me conclude by saying this. The Royal Commission is too important to become a political plaything. I welcome the strong bipartisan support for the Royal Commission, which was offered to me by the Shadow Attorney-General, Mr Dreyfus, when we spoke last week. I trust that that bipartisan support will continue. The government has acted swiftly and decisively to ensure that the resignation of Mr Martin will not delay the work of the Royal Commission. It is now for the Commissioners to set about that important work, and I thank them for their willingness to take on this very significant and challenging task. I'll invite Justice White and Mr Gooda to make a few remarks, and then we'll have some questions. Justice White.
Thank you, Attorney. I'm very honoured to have been approached by the government for what I think everyone would see as a rather difficult, if not rather challenging, task. I won't say anything about the terms of reference. That's a matter for the Commission as it unfolds. But I would like to say that it is a great privilege for me to have an opportunity to have as a co-commissioner Mr Gooda, and I know that we are going to be able to deal with the various and difficult aspects of this inquiry harmoniously, and we hope to a good outcome and some recommendations which will see good juvenile justice in the Northern Territory. Thank you.
Thank you. Mick?
Well, I'm sorry, perhaps before I hand over to Mr Gooda, could I say, so that I don't have to speak again, that we do hope that we'll be able to seamlessly proceed with the timetable that had been alluded to at the end of last week, so that it's anticipated that we'll give a directions hearing on the 6th of September in Darwin, and that we will move to hearings in Darwin in October and probably in other places as well. And the Commission will have established its own website in the next couple of days, but in the short term you can find out what you need to, like the terms of reference, for example, of the Commission, if you don't already have those, by going to the Attorney-General's website, where you can follow the links.
Thank you. Mr Gooda.
Today's a pretty special day for me, being tasked with investigating those awful things we saw last week on the ABC Four Corners program. I've been fairly vocal about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people needing to have confidence in the process, to have confidence in the outcomes. I think I may have set myself up a bit, because I will be now part of that process, and it's with great humility that I accepted the offer to be Royal Commissioner and to take on that role. I look forward to our first sittings on the 6th of September.